The underrated power of love. So we're going to have a little bit of a continuation of a conversation that we started to have last week. And this month's theme is all based on this thought or this concept called love, which has been talked about throughout the history of mankind. And yet, what we know is the masters, when they came down here, they always made such a big deal about love. And we're trying to understand it. We're trying to take it out of this thing, this lesson, this concept, if you will. And yeah, like it sounds great, but what do I do with this thing? How do I apply it? What can I do with it? Because all these people, all the masters, all the teachers, everyone's telling us love, 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 love. Well, what do we do with it? And so we started to have this conversation last week. And I will tell you that one of my greatest gifts of standing up here and preparing these talks is, guess what? I get to go through it, right? So I don't just get up here and have these conversations and then be able to walk out that door and not learn the lessons. No. No, trust me, what happens is as I'm working on these talks, what happens is what? Life shows up, right? So Leah was mentioning that I'm in the process of training for the Detroit Marathon. I know a lot of you guys know I'm a runner, and next weekend's the marathon. And I'm at a point with my training where it's like it's peaked out. So now it's time to just chill out and relax, and you're on kind of like final approach, and you're ready to land the airplane, right? You don't have to do much. So last Monday, I go for a run. Now, mind you, I've been feeling great the entire time. Great, my body feels good, everything's on, we're really, really good, right? And all of a sudden, I'm into a 5-mile run, and my calf locks up so hard, I can barely walk. Now, I will tell you that this isn't the first time this little situation has happened to me before. It's happened before. And I'm also going to say this. Normally, it's not a really good thing to have happen. Because it usually means that I'm going to be down for a while. Right? And so I just stood there, I stopped, and I said, well, that's kind of interesting. Take a deep breath. And then everybody knows what now happens. Do you not know what happens? Where does my brain go? Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to run. This happens all the time. Why does this always happen? I've only got 2 weeks to go. I've prepared. I've done all this stuff. Yada, 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 right? That lasted about 2 hours, and then I was pretty much miserable for the rest of the day. But then I got up the next morning, kind of shook it off a little bit, got my act back together, went through my prayers, went through my meditations and everything, and okay, we're all right. Just calm down. You got a couple of weeks. Relax. You'll be all right. Tuesday was okay. Didn't run. Wednesday, I was here. Decided to go for another run. I'm feeling good. I'm stretching out. The thing's feeling better. Okay. Just a little glitch. We're fine. Go for a run. Guess what happens? Locks up. Right? And guess what I do? Right? And as I was going through this process, of course, the message came through. What are you teaching, Mike? What are you talking about? Love. Just by chance, I'm kind of curious, did you, and this is God talking to me, tapping me on my shoulder, going, did you by chance happen to remember what you're talking about? And do you remember like one of the really important things about this thing that you're talking about called love? And maybe part of it has to do with maybe inviting it in to the situation that you're resisting and freaking out about? Do you ever think that might help? Seeing as how you're talking about it, might not be a bad idea. Now, I'm going to share with you the rest of the story. I'm going to be a little bit of a Paul Harvey for all you Paul Harvey fans out there. I'll share the rest of the story with you in a minute because it's kind of a fun story. But I want to share this concept really this idea of love and bringing it into the stuff that we got going on in our lives. But I want to take it deeper with you guys today. I want you to really understand what happens, because that scenario that I went through happens all the time. How many people have had scenarios like that, maybe even this morning, or in your life, or something you're dealing with now? Yeah, everybody's raising their hand. Everybody's going like, yeah, I kind of get it, right? And it's not a unique thing. I want to share with you a story. It's in Matthew 13, or 14, chapter 23. So this is right after Jesus feeds the 5,000, right? They're hanging out, it's getting dark outside, and all the disciples get in a boat and they're going for a boat ride. Okay, so they're in a boat. So Jesus said, hey, you guys take off, I'm going to go hang out with God for a while and pray. So then afterwards, he went up into the hills to pray. Night fell, and out on the lake the disciples were in trouble. For the wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy seas. About 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the water. And I can't help it, I laugh at this, right? I'm just trying to visualize this. These guys are out in a boat, seas are going crazy everywhere, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning, pitch black, and all of a sudden you see Jesus just walking along the water. Do. Hey boys, what's up? Yeah, it's just a funny visual to me. I don't know why, but it just is. So anyways, Jesus spoke to them, reassuring them, hey, don't be afraid. Chill out. Relax. We got it. Right? And then Peter called to him and said, sir, if it's really you, because they weren't sure with everything that was going on, if it's really you, tell me to come over to you walking on the water. Jesus is like, okay, come on, right? So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. So he gets out of the boat and he starts walking across the water. Everything's fine. Or is it? But when he looked around at the high waves, he was terrified and he began to sink. And then he says, save me, Lord, he shouted. And instantly Jesus reached out his hand and rescued him. So that's the story. As you start to really pull that story apart, let's look at that story. Let's do a redo and look at it metaphysically. What do you think? Awesome. So let's talk about water. Metaphysically, water can be understood as negation, negativity, right? The race thoughts have formed a sea of thought, and to walk over it safely requires that one have faith in oneself, faith necessary to accomplish so great a work. A work comes from understanding, and an understanding of God and man and the law of the mastery given to man. Okay, that's interesting. But it's not necessary to walk on material water to follow Jesus. His walking on the water is a lesson in spiritual overcoming. When we have found the spirit of the law, the material expression adjusts itself. We live constantly in a sea of thought that is moved on by every impulse of the mind. There are greater storms on land than on sea. And again, the individual who allows herself to become negative to the good finds themselves uncertain and unstable in their mind. And often the body becomes so submerged in the waters of negativity that their physical condition is low. So that's what water represents, right? Now, we go back to the story. The winds picked up. What are the winds? They're out on the water. What are the winds? What's happening with the water? The wind, excuse me. It's a stirring up. Everybody know what I'm talking about? When our thoughts start going, what starts happening? The winds are picking up. Your thoughts are starting to swirl. They're starting to go. They're starting to go, right? And then, Peter shows up. Peter, metaphysically, represents faith. It goes on to say that Peter, to walk on water of troubled thought without sinking requires established faith of Jesus and the saving power of Spirit. Peter represents faith in the various stages of development. And so, Peter represents faith. It's kind of funny because a lot of the stories in the Bible when it came to Peter, he actually doesn't have a lot of faith, right? This isn't the first time where Peter went, whoa, what's going on, right? Then the next part of the story is Jesus. And Jesus equals love. So let's go back to the story again and now take all the metaphysical stuff and put it all together. So, night fell, and while on the lake, the disciples were in trouble. What's going on? Negative thoughts are coming up. The wind is starting to blow. Thoughts are swirling. Right? And then all of a sudden, Jesus shows up. Love shows up. Hey guys, what's happening? And then Peter, faith, says, hey, if that's really you, why don't you tell me to come over there and walk on the water? Jesus says, yeah, no problem. No problem. So Peter gets out of the boat. He's pulling it off. And then guess what happens? Bloop, bloop, bloop. Starts to sink. Right? Starts to think. Or sink, excuse me. Although you could say he started to think. Could you imagine what he was thinking at that time? It's almost kind of like one of these. He's kind of looking around going, oh my God, am I really doing this? Oh, right? So anyways, he starts to sink, and then he does a really smart thing. What does he do? He calls out to Jesus. He calls out to love. And he says, help. He says, help. Because what he knows, metaphysically, what's going on is that all the stuff is swirling, all the thoughts are swirling, all the negativity is swirling. We're trying to do it on our own. We kind of pull in faith. We're kind of doing this thing and that thing. Love shows up and basically says, hey, by the way, I'm here. And then all of a sudden we try and do it on our own. And then we kind of get wonky. And then all of a sudden we start sinking. And then Peter calls out to love and says, help. Help. And guess what? What does love do? That's what love does. That's what love does. So love is the thing that basically comes in. The moral of the story is Peter had to do what? He had to ask. He had to ask. Right? He had to ask. I want to go back for a minute and touch base on something, because something we touched on last week, to me, is really where this whole thing comes down. And I think the statement by Ernest Holmes is so powerful, I'm going to read it to you again. It's becoming one of my favorite quotes, literally, and it's about love and the power of love. And for those of you that weren't here, or even those that were here, the quote is, love is within us. It cannot be destroyed. Cannot be destroyed. However, it can be ignored. We can forget it. What happened? Peter forgot. Whoops, I forgot. I forgot it, right? To the extent that we abandon love, we feel it has abandoned us. Why? Because we forgot it. we will feel it has abandoned us. Denying love is our only problem. And embracing it is the only answer. Calling it back, calling it into the situation, no matter what's going on, bringing it back to yourself, right? Through power of love, we can let go of past history, bye-bye, and begin again. Love heals, love forgives, and love makes whole. Not a bad gig. Not a bad thing to have in your tool belt as we go through life, as we try to walk on water, whatever walking on water may look like for you in this time of your life, in this season of your life. Because aren't there moments where we all have to walk on water and do something that we think is absolutely impossible? Like we're called to do something that is so far beyond what it is that we've ever experienced before, whether it's a loss of a loved one, whether it's a loss of a job, whether it's a health challenge. Don't we all have moments where it feels like we're supposed to be walking on water? Yeah, we do. That's life. That's what happens. And we've all had those moments, right? And so what I want to ask you this morning, the thing that I want to ask and for you to think about as we process this talk we're having is where, when do you abandon love? When does something hit you so hard that all of a sudden everything just goes out the window? So in other words, all this stuff sounds great. Sit up here, say everything that's going on, but all of a sudden something goes bam and start rocking. So in my example, it was, in this one particular example, I wish I could sit here and tell you that's the only example in my life I have. That would be a big lie. We don't lie in church. But that's my example. So my question to you as you process this and you think about it is, where do you abandon love? Where does it happen? Where does life grab you so hard that it just makes you forget everything? Because what I'm going to tell you is that we all do it. So first and foremost, I just want you to breathe and understand we all go through this process. If you're on this planet, you have those moments. It's part of the trip. And so, but what happens is we can feel like we're being an absolute failure because just be honest. Don't we feel like that we're a failure when those moments happen? Don't we? I do. I don't know about you guys, but I do. Because here I am sitting there talking about this stuff. I've trained on it. I've spoken about it for 40 years of my life. And yet I have a little cramp in a muscle, and you would think that I'm just like this babbling idiot that doesn't even know how to frickin' pray. And I'm just being real, because that's really what happens, right? So my question to you is, when you start processing this and you start going through this stuff in your life, where is it? When do you abandon it? When does it go out the tubes? When does it just happen for you? Because more than likely what I will tell you is that there's probably a couple of things in our lives that we came here to figure out, and more than likely, whatever it is that triggers you is probably your greatest lesson. More than likely. One of the important things that you came down here to figure out, one of the important things that you came here to learn. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's necessarily easy. Some of the stuff that people have going on in their lives today isn't easy. But what I can tell you is that by bringing in love, by inviting love in, it gets a whole lot easier. A whole lot easier. Why? Because it gives you another option other than, and this is from last week's talk, it gives you another option other than fear. Do you get that? Because normally when we get hit that hard, what happens is most of us go into fear. We talked about the different faces of what fear looks like. How many people are familiar with the book called Nonviolent Communication? It's an awesome book. It's out in the bookstore. It's really, really, really good. And one of the things it does is it takes a list of all of our emotions that we call fear, in my opinion, what it does, and it just defines them. So you can see that, for example, some of the words are you're afraid, you're annoyed, you're angry, you're disconnected, you're confused. It's aversion, it's pain, you're embarrassed, you're vulnerable. There's a list of about 150 names of fear. And all of them, at the root of all of those, are fear. It's fear. So again, as you're sitting here listening, I hope you're feeling, I hope you're thinking, I hope you're saying, where is it that I get knocked off? Another way that you can tell is just by feeling the resistance. Where do you feel resistance? What are you pushing against in your life that's going on? That's another good place to look. But just understand when we choose love, what gets to happen is we get to choose something other than fear, regardless whatever the name is. Regardless of whatever you call it, it doesn't matter. But I promise you, if you look at those lists, there is going to be a couple of those where you're going to look at it and you're going to go, oh boy, that's me. Those are the ones that I use. Because we all have our favorites. And I wouldn't say favorites. What I would just say is they're unconscious reactions to what's ever going on. When I was running and that thing locked up, do you know where the first place my brain went to was? Oh, fill in the blank, here we go again. Why does this always happen to me? Why? And so what happened is, for all you neuroscience people out there, what happened is I got triggered, and now all of a sudden the neural pathway is fired up, and I'm starting to fire up the same old story that I've told myself 100 times, 1,000 times. That's what's really going on. So in my thinking, what's going on is I'm going back to a time when this thing was originally created, right? Only when you fire off the neural pathway, what's happening is now, and this is where it's kind of fun to tie in the metaphysical part and everything else, is that the winds are blowing. Because that neural pathway gets fired up, and guess what? That neural pathway is made up of a series of thoughts. Not just one. There may be one at the root of it or the base of it, but it's a series of thoughts. And it's fascinating to sit there and watch us when we get triggered. If you can, this isn't easy, but you can get there, where you can kind of just sit back and you can watch those thoughts. All the different thoughts around this particular issue. All of them. And that's part of the neural pathway that we've created in our brain, because the way that we form neural pathways is we just keep telling ourselves the same old thoughts over and over and over again. Normally, a neural pathway is a story with a lot of moving parts in it, a lot of moving thoughts in it. And so what happens is we get triggered, the neural pathway fires, and all of a sudden we're going down this road of, what about this? And why does it always happen to me? And how come I got to wait before 2 weeks to do blah, 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 blah. Right? Everybody with me? Yeah. Yeah. So then what do we do about it? Well, I think that we just got a pretty good understanding of the metaphysical thing that we do with it. We ask love to come in. Love is a power. Like Holmes said, it's a power. You can actually use it. It heals. It helps us process. It helps us be unstuck. And when that happens, guess what? Game changer. Game changer. So you can take a situation where you've done the same thing, and I don't care if it's about a relationship, I don't care if it's about your health, I don't care if it's about money. I don't care about whatever else is going on in your life, or whatever else you think is going on in your life. It's a game changer. Because you're inviting love in. You're just asking it, hey, will you come in? I might not see it, I might not understand it, I may not know how it works, but I want you to step in. I'm asking you to come in. I need some help. So for a moment, if you could imagine being Peter, he's starting to sink, and now all we're doing is we're saying help. That's it. It doesn't mean we have to apologize. We don't have to do it perfectly. It's not like there's a right and wrong way to do this, by the way. There's not. It's just simply a matter of asking for help. Right? So, what's the rest of the story? So the rest of the story is Wednesday after I freaked out. Okay, I'm officially freaked out. Got a week and a half to go and I got to go run 26 miles. I can't run more than a mile without this thing shutting me down. I asked for help. So I said, I don't get it. Somewhere, someplace, here's what I know. There's a piece of inside of me that's a part of the divine that I'm connected to in this moment. And I don't care what it looks like. I don't care how emotionally, I don't care how strong the winds are blowing. I know that in the moment that I'm still connected. I'm still connected to my divinity. I'm still connected to Source or God. I'm still connected. And so I may not see it. I may not understand it. I may be emotional. But instead of choosing fear, I'm going to invite love in. I'm going to invite love in. And I did that. Legitimately did it. And I made a decision, and my first decision was, I'm going to choose love versus fear. I may not know what it looked like. I may not know what it sounds like. I may not even understand it. I don't even know, quite frankly, if it's going to work or not. Yeah, sometimes I think that. Just being real. But what happened is I said, no matter what, I'm not going to focus on fear. I'm going to focus on love instead. And I'm going to stand strong on that. No matter what the winds are telling me, no matter what the story is, I'm going to sit there and say, I'm choosing love versus fear. So that's the first decision I made. And then what happened is, and this is a pretty cool story, right? Because it just kind of blows my mind in some respects, right? All right, that's Wednesday. Thursday morning, I get up and I'm in my meditation. In my meditation, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I'm in quiet meditation. I'm not doing some other stuff I do when I'm quiet. I'm in quiet meditation. All of a sudden, I have this guy's name pop into my head, like, you got to call this guy. What? Yeah, you got to call this guy. And here's the thing. I've never gone and I know this person, but I've never seen him once in my entire life, ever. But I happen to know him. And he's a physical therapist. And I've heard of him. But I never knew him, and I haven't even thought about his name in 2 years, at least. I'm like, okay, I guess. So what's interesting is Leah comes down in the morning, and I said, I had the craziest thought. I said, I had this thought that I should give Scott a call. And she started laughing, and she goes, don't ask me why, but I'm telling you, for the last day, I kept thinking, why isn't he calling Scott? I'm like, wow, that's crazy, right? So later on in the morning, I called Scott. Went to his voicemail. Oh, well, he's not available. He calls me back later, and he says, hey, Mike, thanks for calling me. I really appreciate this. He says, but I don't really, this was on Thursday. He said, I don't have any, I usually don't come into my office on Friday. But, tomorrow, I had the craziest thing happen. I have this client who really needs to see me. And if you're around at 3:15 tomorrow, I can see you. Wait a minute, let me get this right. You don't normally work on Friday. You just happen to be in your office at the same time that I can just happen to go see you. And I've never talked to this guy to have him work on me one time. Never. So I go in and I see him on Friday, and I could sit here and talk for another 20 minutes about the story and what an amazing experience it was. But all I can tell you is that a lot of questions that I had got answered seeing him. A lot. And he worked on my leg, and at least right at this moment, I can tell you that I'm feeling good, and I am confident that next Sunday, about this time, I hope to be done with running the Detroit Marathon. Hopefully. Right? So I'm choosing faith over fear. Okay, I don't know about you, but it blows my mind. What had to happen in order for all of this to come together? Right? In the first place, I had to be working on this talk. In the second place, God had to come down, tap me on the shoulder, and talk to a person I've never talked to before in my life, ever, and say, hey, you need to do this. My wife came down and said, I've been thinking about Scott the entire time. I call him, and he says, do you see all the things that had to line up in order for me to be walking in this guy's office Friday afternoon? It blows my mind. Guess what? That's love. It all goes back to the thing that I was saying in the beginning. What did Peter do? Help. He humbled himself enough to say help. And he chose love to reach out to Jesus, love over fear. He didn't let himself go into fear. It's the same thing. It's the same exact thing. My hope is that in the story that I shared with you this morning, that something inside of your heart wakes up and hears this. You guys are connected. This stuff is within you. It's within you. It's within all of us. You guys have the chance to do the same exact thing. The same thing. We're all the same. There's that piece of us, that divine part in us that we all have access to. It's just remembering in that moment when we're freaking out, just to take a breath. Love is here. Help. I'm going to choose to focus on faith over fear, on love over fear. I'm not going into fear. I'm not going to do it. And then watch the doors open. That's it. It's pretty simple. And yet, amazingly powerful. Yeah? Cool. We good? You guys are amazing. Blessings.